Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, your tired midnight blogger, what blogs in this case at 11:02 p.m. I've been celebrating my birthday, talking with my sister and my brother-in-law about the craziness of the world, and then I vegged for a bit. I planned a little bit for this stream. I hope that it ends up being worthy of your time. I wanted to talk not about politics so much, although perhaps we will delve a little bit into that, but mainly about socialism versus capitalism. If I have the energy, I'm hoping very much to make it to midnight. I know I have the material to do it, and I think I probably have the interest, even if I just have two people, to make it to that time. I do hope to be, as always, fair, except I will say this. If we get to the end of the material, I will also discuss communism, and I will just be open and transparent. I can't really do a very fair assessment of communism. I just, I hope it's not all emotional. Some of it is my studies of history. Some of it is my studies of economics. True communism is anathema to me. So let's say hello to the people in the chat. I think we have two, and that is wonderful because they're two intelligent and very supportive people. We have JPRPH1 here from a Sparkwood and 21 raid. I am loving Twin Peaks. And good evening to you, Matt Cheatwood. I know that today's subject is very important to you. It's one of the reasons why I picked it. I know that those of us who think, I don't mean to sound too overbearing here, but those of us who think a lot about this. Hopefully I teach a little bit here. Frankly, Matt Cheatwood, you probably know as much or more than I do about it, but that's okay. Getting people to even agree on the definitions of these two terms is difficult. And thank you. Please let me know if everything is coming in loud and clear. I only have, mostly I'm going to be reading and discussing today, so it may be a little bit boring. I don't have Tulsi in her bikinis or anything like that. I do have some videos at the end, and if it gets too boring, I can look up some stuff with videos, but this will largely be a think piece. And I agree, Matt Cheatwood. I won't even attempt to be fair in this one. Communism is simply slavery by another name. You and I both fans of Ayn Rand. I think you agree with her more than I do, but having said that, when it comes to economics, I'm probably about 80 to 90% in agreement with her, at least. I am not a fan of communism at all. Socialism, well, we'll just discuss it. We'll see where we end up at the end. Well, I think I have played enough of the soft prone music, and I have 6 people in here. So hopefully we can find something to discuss that is worthy of those 6 people's time. We shall start with simple definitions. Going to be a little pedantic today. Going to be going with thoughtco.com. I didn't want to go too pedantic, but at the same time, I wanted it to at least be something better than, the usual suspects. Let me make sure the comments are still up here. Yes, okay. So we have socialism versus capitalism, and what is the difference? Socialism, capitalism, two main economic systems used in most countries today. The main difference between capitalism and socialism is the extent to which the government controls the economy. So, yes, while I'm going to try to be fair, those of you who know me will probably know I also have a bias in this, and you probably can figure out which way it leans. But Matt Cheatwood's opinion is that free market capitalism is the best system humans have ever come up with. And we, of course, do not have free markets here in the U.S. And again, this is revealing my bias, but I agree with you on both points. Matt Cheatwood, controls is another word for regulations. Yes. Yes. The key takeaways from thoughtco.com: socialism is an economic and political system under which the means of production are publicly owned. Production and consumer prices are controlled by the government to best meet the needs of the people. Capitalism is an economic system under which the means of production are privately owned. Production and consumer prices are based on a free market system of supply and demand. Socialism is most often criticized for its provision of social services programs requiring high taxes that may decelerate economic growth. Personally, that's not my top criticism of it, but close enough, good enough for the girls that I date. I kind of wish she was here now. Anyway, capitalism is most often criticized for its tendency to allow income inequality and stratification of socioeconomic classes. And yep, that's the big criticism. And while I don't think it negates capitalism, I think it's a relevant criticism. It needs to be discussed. Socialist governments strive to eliminate economic inequality by tightly controlling businesses and distributing wealth through programs that benefit the poor, such as free education and health care. Capitalism, on the other hand, holds that private enterprises utilize economic resources more efficiently than the government, and that society benefits when the distribution of wealth is determined by a freely operating market. You can see here the little chart. I won't get too pedantic about it, but basically there are differences between the ownership of the assets, the income equality, consumer prices, efficiency and innovation, healthcare, taxation. Hey, Connie Cleary, it is good to see you. It is okay that you were late. I know you're all over the place. Likely you are also in the stream celebrating the life, mourning the loss of Bird of Prey 5. I did not know him, but I am sorry. I'm always sorry for the loss of pretty nearly everybody except for the very worst tyrants. And obviously he was not a bad tyrant. So yes, we mourn his loss. But it is good to see you. And I hope that this discussion will be worth your time, and maybe some of it will be entertaining, and maybe we'll learn a little something, just like those after-school specials. The more you know, bing, we want to be socialists or capitalists or whatever we want to be. I guess I will throw out a couple of things about capitalism and socialism. Because, you know, what you already know, but efficiency, free market competition encourages efficiency and innovation in capitalism. Government-owned businesses have less incentive for efficiency and innovation. I think even your socialists will tend to agree with that. They will argue, and possibly rightly, possibly wrongly, they will argue that the benefits of a safety net and so on outweigh that. But I think nearly all of us understand that in truth, socialism is cumbersome, and often governments are slow to react to what people want. Knowing is half the battle. Yes, I thought you were in this. I believe you are in the other stream, and that's awesome. If I weren't doing this one, I would dual share the other one, but my computer's been acting slow today, and I want to focus on the stream. Try to give you guys something worth listening to. The United States. Well, before I get there, healthcare is often provided by the private sector in capitalist systems and provided free or subsidized by the government in socialist systems. Capitalist taxation is typically based on individual income. Personally, I think that is arguable because it is a little oversimplistic. There are many different forms of taxation. Frankly, the United States didn't tax individual income until I want to say 1913 or 1905, somewhere in there. Socialists rarely will argue that you have to have, if you're going to do all this stuff, you have to have high taxes. It's just the way it is. If you want the public services, you have to have high taxes. And so that is often the crux of the argument. Do we want the services or do we want the low taxes? Matt Cheatwood, democratically elected governments are incentivized to create problems, not to solve them. And we will discuss that if I last long enough. We absolutely will. The United States, generally considered to be a capitalist country. I would say very nearly it's the capitalist country. There may be some place that's more laissez-faire than us, but I would really love to know what it is. Because I might just go there. Anyway, many Scandinavian and Western European countries are considered socialist democracies. In reality, however, most medium and high-income countries, including the U.S., employ a mixture of socialist and capitalist programs. All right, so what is this stuff we've been harping about? Capitalism is an economic system under which private individuals own and control businesses, property, and capital, the quote-unquote means of production. I don't want to get too deep into this rabbit hole, but the internet was supposed to be a great godsend equalizer between the two systems because the argument was that you had the means of production in your computer. If you could just get the computer and the software and the internet, you now have the means of production. And so we were supposed to go back to this neat thing where capitalism was a godsend again, and everyone would live happily ever after. Matt Cheatwood says that the U.S. is 3 socialist countries in a trench coat. I like that. The volume of goods and services produced is based on a system of supply and demand. I kind of wished I could have found my economics textbook, but frankly, I don't want to get too deeply into it all. We could go deeper into it later if we want. Supply and demand encourages businesses to manufacture quality products as efficiently and inexpensively as possible. I think most of you probably understand prices go up if the supply goes down. Prices go down if the supply goes up. And it's the opposite with demand. If there's more demand, the price goes up. If there's less demand, the price goes down. In the purest form of capitalism, free market or laissez-faire capitalism, individuals are unrestrained in participating in the economy. They decide where to invest their money as well as what to produce and sell at what prices. True laissez-faire capitalism, which I would suggest has either never existed or only very rarely exists, operates without government controls. Your actual anarchists from the 19th century, that That was the dream, was we would have laissez-faire capitalism without government controls. In reality, also the libertarians, at least, try their belief, if I understand it correctly, is to get as close to that as we reasonably can. In reality, however, most capitalist countries employ some degree of government regulation of business and private investment. Capitalist systems make little or no effort to prevent income inequality. Theoretically, and my side note is that's because that's not the purpose of an economy. The purpose of an economy is to get as many goods to as many people as is reasonably possible. I haven't looked that up. That's my own thinking. That's my own analysis. But we can talk about that later if we need to. Theoretically, financial inequality encourages competition and innovation, which drive economic growth. Under capitalism, the government does not employ the general workforce. As a result, unemployment can increase during economic downturns. Under capitalism, individuals contribute to the economy based on the needs of the market and are rewarded by the economy based on their personal wealth. Kind of a side note, the whole justification of wealth, in theory, is that you have added that value to the society. Now, again, I'm not saying that I'm going to die on this hill tonight, but that's the theory. You added X amount to the good of society, and therefore you are rewarded with a commensurate Y amount of wealth. Now, of course, socialism would argue that it's a very similar thing. It's just that instead of the market, it is the government that decides how much that value was to society. Socialist definition is a variety of economic systems under which the means of production are owned equally, which sounds so good. It really does. Even with my bias, I've got to admit, I look at that and I'd be like, wow, wouldn't that be cool? We'll see if it is or not. The means of production are owned equally by everyone in society. In some socialist economies, the democratically elected government owns and controls major businesses and industries. In other socialist economies, production is controlled by worker cooperatives. In a few others, individual ownership of enterprise and property is allowed, but with high taxes and government control. I would argue that we are actually more of a socialism that has the individual ownership of most of the enterprises and property, but with high taxes and government control. I wasn't that long ago we were a capitalist society, but I would argue that we no longer are. We may get there, we may not. It depends on where we go. The mantra of socialism is from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Thomas Merton pointed out in the very last speech that he gave alive that is actually truly a noble ideal, but that it can only be achieved in a monastery or in some such spiritual enterprise. Because without the spirituality, without the voluntaristic surrendering of your own ego, it frankly doesn't often work. We'll see if that's just my opinion or if we can back this up. The means that each person in society gets a share of the economy's collective production, goods, and wealth. Now, they don't point out that in a capitalistic society, you also get that share, but it is commensurate on different things. Each person in society gets a share of the goods and wealth based on how much they need, not on what they produce, not on the value that they add to the society, except for how the government decides that that is, but based off of what they need. I won't do your own thinking for you. Do your own thinking on that. Workers are paid their share of production after a percentage has been deducted to help pay for social programs that serve the common good. In contrast to capitalism, the main concern of socialism is the elimination of rich and poor socioeconomic classes by ensuring an equal distribution of wealth among the people. Matt Cheatwood points out that voluntary is extremely important to me and myself as well. I often joke about going to a monastery. I'm okay with people voluntarily, and you've pointed this out before, Matt, that we all have that voluntary capacity. You can always give more to your neighbor or to your state or to your library or to whomever. But we are forced to give a certain amount. This is something the socialists don't always often like to talk about. I'm curious. I've glossed through this article, but I didn't read it closely. I'm curious if it says anything about that. But trust me, if this one doesn't, I've got some others that do. In contrast to capitalism, the main concern of socialism is the elimination of the classes. To accomplish this, the socialist government controls the labor market, sometimes to the extent of being the primary employer. This allows the government to ensure full employment even during economic downturns. Matt Cheatwood, based on what the government says. Exactly. And I know I'm being a little bit unfair maybe because I'm throwing my interpretations in here, but I think these are good things to point out. I mean, if the government's making all these decisions, well, then that opens the whole can of worms of how is the government run? Are these decisions made? Are there elections? Are there dictators? Are there kings? Who are these people making the decisions? The socialist versus capitalist debate. The key arguments in the debate focus on socioeconomic equality and the extent to which the government controls wealth and production. Capitalists argue that private ownership of property is essential to ensuring the natural right of people to control their own affairs. That was, in fact, the belief of literally all of the founding fathers. They may have held it to a varying degree, but they all held it. That doesn't necessarily prove that it's true or right. I just feel the need to point that out. Capitalists believe that because private sector enterprises use resources more efficiently than the government, and I defy you to find many studies that are legitimately done that can disprove that, society is better off when the free market decides who profits and who does not. In addition, private ownership of property makes it possible for people to borrow and invest money, thus growing the economy. Socialists, on the other hand, believe that property should be owned by everyone. Now, let me give a caveat here. I think everyone should at least have the opportunity and chance to get property. I think that's one of the holes in some of the capitalistic thought from back in the day when there were slaves and things. But I don't like just a tacit guarantee. Maybe, anyway, we can get into that later. But I don't think that anyone should be guaranteed to say, for example, I'm going to be a little unfair here, but I don't think we should have the tacit agreement that everyone gets a Ferrari. Everyone gets one. Doesn't matter whether you get up and work or not, which is another hole in the whole thing. How do the socialists enforce work? Because you'll have to have people work. Doesn't matter which of these theories you go along, you have to have people work in order to produce the things that are being distributed, whether it's the market or the government doing it. Anyway, socialists argue that capitalist private ownership allows relatively few wealthy people to acquire most of the property. And I'm going to admit that's a point that needs to be discussed and looked at. It really does. The most important thing a person owns is their own body. Agreed. 100% agreed. If you don't own your own body, you are a slave. And the system does not matter. Socialist, capitalist, whatever it is. If you own your own body, you have at least some degree of freedom. If you don't own your body, none of the rest matters. You are a slave. The resulting income inequality leaves those less well off at the mercy of the rich. And again, even though I have my bias, that is a point that needs to be evaluated and discussed when we're talking about these systems. Socialists believe that since income inequality hurts the entire society, now, I'm going to let that point go, but there's a part of me that wants to be pedantic and say, well, who established that? Who proved that? What was the study? What are the value systems you're using to deduce that? If you can be forced to work, you do not own yourself. Not wrong. That's definitely a good thought. Socialists believe that since income inequality hurts the entire society, the government should reduce it through programs that benefit the poor, such as free education and health care and higher taxes on the wealthy. Consumer prices under capitalism are determined by free market forces. And this is, to me, the strongest aspect of capitalism, at least until you get a monopoly. I really do think that unless you're really disingenuous in your belief systems, capitalism will always get you the best prices. Now, when there's monopolies involved, or when there is theft, or when there is lying, because I don't think that any of these articles discuss it, but the underpinning of a capitalist society is a well-informed society making its decisions based off of transparent, product knowledge. It doesn't work without that. That's the strongest thing that the socialists have. People can't really do it because they're lied to and they're not very intelligent. Well, that's all well and good. My retort to that is, are they any more intelligent in your society? Is your society any more transparent? Because if it isn't, I don't really see that the socialism is that much better than the capitalism. Socialists argue that this enables businesses that have become monopolies to exploit their power by charging excessively higher prices than warranted by their production costs. And if you're even a mild student of economics, that's sadly, it's true. Monopolies do throw a monkey wrench in the whole thing. Monopolies, however, Matt Cheatwood does point this out, and it's not wrong. They're often enforced by government regulations more than any other factor. If people are ignorant and stupid and the government is run by the people, yeah, and that was the whole argument behind monarchies and aristocracies. That was what made those arguments such strong arguments back in the day. The people are ignorant and stupid. They can't run their own lives. Therefore, they need kings. They need nobles. They need tyrants. They can't run their own lives. The only way that the American system works is if we have people who are not ignorant and are not stupid and are at least somewhat moral. And of course, that opens a whole can of worms. But in socialist economies, consumer prices are usually controlled by the government. Capitalists say this leads to shortages and surpluses of essential products. Yeah, and I think just a cursory look at history will prove that that's mostly true. Venezuela is often cited as an example. According to UNHCR, inflation as well as shortages of food, medicine, and essential services have forced millions to seek refuge. Hyperinflation and deteriorating health conditions under the socialist economic policies of President Nicolas Maduro have driven an estimated 7.7 million people to leave the country as food became a political weapon. Matt Cheatwood, they used to need the nobility. Now they need the college-educated elites. Yes, we do, in fact. And somebody pointed out to me the other day, I'm actually kind of hoping that none of my liberal friends do show up, or that if they show up, they will understand. It was pointed out to me that every last one of my liberal friends has a college degree. Every last one of them. And I didn't know what to think about that. I may talk about that a little more later, or I may not. But I'm just going to let that sink in. If you're part of that class that is saying that you need us to make your decisions, then you want to be the part of the government that's making those decisions. Only the highly educated are capable of deciding what is good for you. You know, Matt Cheatwood, I think I like you more knowing that. You have the degree, but yet you have the intellectual honesty to not think you have to make up everyone else's freaking mind for them. All right. Let's get on. I've already read quite a bit of this. I'm going to skip to the next thing. Going to skip to, again, in my vague efforts at being fair, I've looked up the advantages of capitalism, the advantages of socialism. I'm going to talk about the disadvantages of capitalism, and then I'm going to just go whole hog into, to me, the biggest disadvantage of socialism is that it's too, I firmly believe it's too easy for it to slide into full-blown communism. I know. You know, the Denmark and Sweden and all them, they haven't done it. I get it. But so many other countries have, that I feel that it may not be a universal, but it's so happens so often. So I will end with that disadvantage and just kind of reveal my terrible bias. But y'all can make up your minds whether I know what I'm talking about, whether I don't. The advantages of capitalism. As we already discussed, it's an economy based on free markets where resources and firms are privately owned. In practice, this usually involves some state intervention to protect private property, which I'm, hey, all for that, and regulations for certain aspects of the economy. Most would argue that the United States and the United Kingdom is essentially capitalist. I would argue that the United Kingdom has ceased to be so, but that's just me. Despite the government spending between 35 and 40% of GDP, I have heard higher percentages than that, but I'm not going to argue the point right now. We for now, just for the sake of argument, let's assume and pretend that the United Kingdom and United States have somewhere, or at least the United States, I can't even pretend with the United Kingdom, has somewhere between 35 and 40% of their GDP being controlled by the government. I'm going to have a little bit of a side note here. To me, if your government spending is more than 50% of your GDP, you cannot call yourself a capitalist society anymore. That's my humble opinion. When you cross that 50% threshold, you can say whatever you want, but you're actually a socialist society, which may be a good thing. My bias may be complete crap. Not cheap with Denmark, Sweden, Norway are extremely capitalist societies. See, you never hear that. You always hear about all the socialist stuff. But they have a high tax rate and a strong social safety net. They don't even have a minimum wage. Interesting. See, I did not know that. I did not know that. Everything that you read in your CNNs, MSNBCs, and MOUSE is always just touting about how they're socialist societies and they're brilliant and we should be just like them. So, but anyway, here's the spiffy graph. The advantages of capitalism, efficiency of the private sector, freedom to choose. I don't know about you, but that's honking big to me. And that's also the big thing that scares me about socialism and completely terrifies me about communism, is the loss or even just the degradation of the freedom to choose. According to this article, this is economics.help, there is no better alternative. I know the socialists disagree. I'm not going to hop up and down and say they have no right to think that. Advantages of capitalism has led to the growth in living standards. This was one of the things that started to scare me about my liberal friends. I'd said to them, the truth that I think, if you study history very well, is just, I don't see how it's refutable. There is nothing, with the possible exception, maybe, of the Christian religion. And I would argue that that's not the case either, but capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than anything, anywhere, anyhow. Has there been a lot of horrible things that have happened under it? Oh, yeah, 100%. And do I sometimes wish that we could think of something better and get into that great Star Trek age? Yeah, 100%. I do. But unless you're just a terrible student of history, I think you have to admit that. My friends don't. They've started to say stuff like, well, you know, all that history stuff is all made up. It is? Well, what's your example of something different? And they might throw me some articles, and some of them are good, and some of them I even think are valid, but they don't undermine the 40 years of history study that I've done. I'm just putting that out there. I need more than 2 articles to actually counterbalance that. And also, another advantage of capitalism that nobody seems to like, but it is true, there's a creative destruction about it. That sounds terrifying. It is terrifying. What that means is, as a company or as a business quits being wonderful, as it quits being efficient, as it starts to rest on its laurels, as it stops caring about its customers, unless there's some really strong government regulation or unless it's a monopoly, that company is eventually going to go out of business. And to be honest, even with the other two, eventually it's going to. It may take like hundreds of years, but eventually it will fall apart if it stops, when it stops taking care of the customers. And I know we're all scared of that because none of us likes the idea of losing our jobs. The possibly overly simplistic answer to that is keep taking care of your customers. Keep doing it better than the next guy. and then you don't really have to worry about it. Again, I know that's overly simplistic, because there's a lot of other stuff to be accounted for too. We will get into some of that. What is the alternative? When we're talking about capitalism having advantages, Churchill's quote on democracy springs to mind. Now, I realize that we're kind of getting loose and fast and loose in our definitions here, but it does seem to me that it tends that democracies have capitalist economies. Not always, but they tend to. It has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except that all the others that have been tried. One could say the same for capitalism. Basically, when governments attempt to control the economy, we end up with problems such as corruption, lack of incentives, and poor information. Now, again, I know that the socialists will say, well, there's corruption in the companies, and that's true. And the companies will also often disincentivize their workers, and that's true. And often the companies will obfuscate and lie, and there's still poor information. That's true. But it doesn't, to me, countermand the argument, because the corruption's there in the government too. There's absolutely lack of incentives in the government. You have none. You have none. You're not going to be fired. You can't be fired unless you do something incredibly stupid. And as far as poor information, I think we've already discussed that the government is lying to us through their teeth, and have basically taken over the organs of disseminating the news, and the news is lying to us through their teeth. So I guess you have to ask yourself, which one is more dangerous? I know which one I suspect is. I could be wrong. Capitalism gives efficient allocation of resources. In theory, capitalism is the invisible hand of the market. It ensures resources are distributed according to consumer preferences. Firms are not rewarded for producing goods people don't want. And, well, there it is. Look at Disney. Nobody wants their films. Nobody wants their merchandise. Now, they're huge. They're ginormous. But the fact of the matter is they're starting to hemorrhage. And that's because they're doing things that the customers don't want. Has nothing to do with politics. Start producing things that the people want, they'll start making money again, whether they have the same kind of politics or not. Efficient production in a market system, firms have incentives to be productively efficient, cutting costs to improve competitiveness and productivity. If firms don't remain productive and efficient, they will go out of business. Dynamic efficiency. This is efficiency over time. Firms in a capitalist system need to respond to changes in consumer preferences and respond to new consumer trends. Financial incentives. Evidence suggests that people work hardest when there is a personal financial incentive, and I can vouch for that to be true. If you're just paid a minimum wage and nothing that you do is going to increase what you make, you're eventually going to just stop caring. And I'm sorry, the government isn't usually smart enough to do that. When they are, I think that's awesome. But usually it is a business that rewards workers with those kinds of things. Not often enough, to be fair. You do have too many business people who are not forward thinking enough. Give them about 10 or 20 or 30 years, and we call them people who are now working for somebody else. Entrepreneurs only take risks in setting up businesses because of the potential for large financial reward. If this scope for private profit is absent, new firms won't be set up. Creative destruction. Jay Schumpeter argues a powerful influence in capitalism was the idea of creative destruction. If firms become inefficient and outdated, they go out of business. This leads to short-term problems and, sadly, unemployment. However, it allows resources, capital, and labor to shift to new, more innovative and efficient businesses. Economic freedom helps political freedom. To a thinker like Milton Friedman or Joseph Hayek, economic freedom of capitalism is associated with political freedom. A state that limits the rights of individuals to set up a business or choose where to work will invariably face greater political interference. Milton Friedman says that history suggests capitalism is a necessary condition for political freedom. Clearly, it is not a sufficient condition. After witnessing political repression in places like Chile, Friedman admitted economic freedom was not sufficient to guarantee political freedom, but it was a starting point. It is a mechanism for overcoming discrimination and bringing people together. Now, I know that one's probably going to be controversial, but let's at least read it and think about it. Sashi, the man from the future, how are you doing? Forward-thinking business people, do they still exist? I don't see any evidence of it. And you know what? Sadly, you're not wrong. Even though I'm hopping up and down about how great capitalism is, I see a lot of idiots in the business world. Of course, I'm kind of one of them myself, too. But Matt Cheatwood refused to work for government masquerading as a business where I can be physically punished for how I do my job, where I don't have a choice what my job is. I understand. We can agree on this point or not, but according to the article, capitalism encourages trade between different nations and different people, which that is true. That is absolutely true. Your quest for wealth, you have to try to be innovative. You want to reach as many customers as possible. If you're smart, you won't care if they're black or white or this or that. You'll sell to them because you want that money. This economic incentive works to break down barriers and go past narrow sectarian differences. I know Sadhguru thinks that business will be one of the great equalizers of the future. And I know that's weird to hear that from a spiritual person, but that is his thought, that if we can basically start doing our businesses with an open mind and with more of an incentive of it being a two-way win-win arrangement, that eventually capitalism will bring that about. Something that people don't often talk about him. The great virtue of a free market system is that it does not care what color people are. It does not care what their religion is. It only cares whether they can produce something you want to buy. It's the most effective system we have discovered to enable people who hate one another to deal with one another and help one another. Milton Friedman. The example I'm going to give is the Matrix movie. The people who wrote the story were members of the LGBTQ. I did not find that out until recently. Well, you guess what? I don't care. I don't care what they are. I thought it was a great movie. I bought tickets to it. I bought a DVD of it because it was great. It has nothing to do with, whether they're black or white or gay or straight. They created a great product. They made my life better. And that, if you read Ayn Rand, right or wrong, is in theory the basis of a capitalist society. You make my life better, I give you my money for your product. If you don't, I will instead give it to somebody else. Gary Becker made a similar point. Profit motive would penalize firms and individuals who practiced racial discrimination. There are different types of capitalism. We'll just gloss over that. And rising living standards. And I think that is demonstrably true. Yeah, it's not a perfect upward thing, but I think that since capitalism became the thing, we've had an explosion in our standards of living and in our life expectancies and the quality of our lives. And I cannot for the life of me understand why, if you're socialist or if you're communist, why are you ignoring that? If you want to argue with it and say, well, it's only a temporary thing or something, that's fine. But why are you ignoring that point? I don't get it. Everybody's saying hi to each other. So hopefully we're giving everyone great products here. Hopefully it's worth the price of admission. All right, Sashi. It's so easy to cause divisions and capitalize on it. Yeah, not wrong, sadly. That's why politicians do it. If we're busy fighting amongst ourselves, we won't pay attention to how bad things are getting. Yeah. No, that's a good point. It is a good point. So now I'm going to dive into the good arguments for socialism. And for that, I'm going to lean on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I don't know that I have the patience to read this whole damn thing, but it looked like probably in a cursory investigation, it was the best put and least trivial and least dishonest of any of the articles that I could find in a short investigation. Matt Cheatwood, did I ever tell you about the game we played in one of my college classes? Maybe, but it's ringing a bell, but the details escape me. So please feel free to share that in the chat. I'm not even going to try to guess, because if I do, it'll probably be wrong. And it would be probably better just for you to go ahead and share and let us know about the game. I know that games are a big deal in economics. Basically, if you really think about it, all economics, no matter what kind you take, is in some way based off of the theory and the practice of games. Oh, okay. Matt Cheatwood is the earn as much as you can game, and he learned a life lesson from it. I think I know what you're talking about, but please feel free to proceed. We're going to make it to midnight, and I might even have to cut some of the material short, because I really want to get to the angsty anti-communist diatribe at the end. Anyway, socialism is according to Stanford, is a rich tradition of political thought and practice, the history of which contains a vast number of views and theories, often differing in many of their conceptual, empirical, and normative commitments. Because we all know capitalism does not have a rich tradition of political thought and practice. I know, I'm being unfair. Going back a century, Angelo Rappaport, in his 1924 Dictionary of Socialism, canvassed no fewer than 40 definitions of socialism. Please, God, let's not go through them all. To take even a relatively restricted subset of socialistic thought, Leszek Kolakowski could fill over 1,300 pages in his magisterial survey of main currents of Marxism. Our aim is of necessity more modest. Yeah, I ain't going to make it through that many pages tonight. Matt Cheatwood. The rules were simple. Each round, the teams chose either the cooperation option or the betray option. If everyone cooperated, everyone got a moderate reward. If only one team betrayed, they got a large reward. Everyone else got nothing. Yeah, I think I've seen some things like that. But please feel free to tell me what the conclusion was. I think I know what it is, but I would rather you go ahead and share it, because you're the one that experienced it. We are concerned to present the main features of socialism as a critique of capitalism and a proposal for its replacement. Our focus is predominantly on literature written within a philosophical idiom, focusing in particular on philosophical writing on socialism produced during the past 40 or so years. Furthermore, Our discussion concentrates on the normative contrast between socialism and capitalism as economic systems. Both socialism and capitalism grant workers legal control of their labor power, but socialism, unlike capitalism, requires that the bulk of the means of production workers use to yield goods and services be under the effective control of workers themselves, rather than in the hands of the members of a different capitalist class under whose direction they must toil. As we will explain below, this contrast has been articulated further in different ways, and socialists have not only made distinctive claims regarding economic organization, but also regarding the processes of transformation fulfilling them and the principles and ideas orienting their justification, including, as we will see, certain understandings of freedom, equality, solidarity, and democracy. All right, Matt Cheatwood continues. If more than one team betrayed, they all got a very small reward. One team kept repeatedly betraying, causing other teams to betray as well. At the end of the game, they thought they had won because they had more than the other teams. Yep, that does seem to be the way it often goes. I know I did not experience this study, but in one of the many classes that I've taken, they have done studies where it's often pretty similar to what you're talking about. Even though we know that the reward is going to be greater for all of us if we all cooperate, people just have this psychological need to I don't care about us all getting more. I want to be the one myself that gets more than you. So, Matt Cheatwood, they had, at the end of the game, they thought they had won, but they had fewer points than if everyone had cooperated. So they didn't win as much as they could. And Sashi is responding, the real reward was the friends we made along the way. Absolutely. Yes, sirree, Bob. Matt Cheatwood, they only wanted to have more than anyone else. Yes. And again, I think if we were angels, maybe socialism would work. And that's a discussion that we're not going to have today, but, is it possible to get to that point? But even with that, I guess that's one of the reasons why I don't feel this affinity for this current climate of let's be socialists, because the people who are proposing it are not only not angels, they seem to be worse than the capitalists that are around me. Matt Cheatwood says he's not good at making friends. Well, you're probably better than you think, but yeah, we live in a world where it is hard to make friends when you're like a decent, honest person sometimes. All right. Socialism is best defined in contrast with capitalism, as socialism has arisen both as a critical challenge to capitalism and as a proposal for overcoming and replacing it. The classical Marxist definition, capitalism involves certain relations of production. These comprise certain forms of control over the productive forces, the labor power that workers deploy in production, and the means of production, such as natural resources, tools, and spaces they employ to yield goods and services, and certain social patterns of economic interaction that typically correlate with that control. Capitalism displays the following constitutive features. The bulk of the means of production is privately owned and controlled. People legally own their own labor power. Here, capitalism differs from slavery and feudalism, under which systems some individuals are entitled to control, whether completely or partially, the labor power of others. Markets are the main mechanism allocating inputs and outputs of production and determining how society's productive surplus is used, including whether and how it is consumed or invested. An additional feature that is typically present wherever 1 through 3 hold, is that there is a class division between capitalists and workers involving specific relations, whether a bargaining conflict or subordination between these classes, and shaping the labor market, the firm, and the broader political process. Now, this is totally outside the scope of this discussion, but I wonder if it's possible to have the first 3 and not have the 4th one. I don't know. The existence of wage labor is often seen by socialists as a necessary condition for society to be counted as capitalist. Typically, workers, unlike capitalists, must sell their labor power to make a living. They sell it to capitalists who, unlike the workers, control the means of production. Capitalists typically subordinate workers in the production process, as capitalists have asymmetric decision-making power over what gets produced and how it gets produced. Capitalists also own the output of production and sell it in the market, and they control the predominant bulk of the flow of investment within the economy. The relations between capitalists and workers can involve cooperation, and I would suggest that they frankly need to, or the business ain't going to go very far, very long, but also relations of conflict. This more or less antagonistic power relationship between capitalists and workers plays out in a number of areas within production itself and in the broader political process, as in both the economic and political domains, decisions are made about who does what and who gets what. There are possible economic systems that would present exceptions in which in other words, the point that I made, do we really have to have that last point in order to have capitalism? Another feature that is typically seen as arising is that production is primarily oriented to capital accumulation. In other words, economic production is primarily oriented to profit rather than just simply to satisfy human needs. That is kind of the theory of capitalism. We risk the capital because we want the profit. A little is simplistic, but it is kind of the way. If it works, that's the way it works, or has in the past. In contrast to capitalism, socialism can be defined as a type of society in which, at minimum, the first point is turned into the bulk of the means of production is under social democratic control. And I think that's the rub that I've always had. It's why I can listen to and talk to a socialist, but I can't talk to a communist. The communists can say whatever they want, but it's not under democratic control. Just not at all. Changes with regard to the other features are hotly debated among socialists. Regarding one of them, socialists do retain the view that workers should control their labor power, but many do not affirm the kind of absolute libertarian property rights and labor power that would prevent taxation or other forms of mandatory contributions to cater for the basic needs of others. There is a recent burgeoning literature on market socialism, which is discussed below. When characterizing socialistic views, it is useful to distinguish between 3 dimensions of a conception of social justice: the core ideals and principles animating that conception of justice, the social institutions and practices implementing the ideals, and the processes of transformation leading agents in their society from where they are currently to the social outcome specified. The characterization of capitalism and socialism in the previous section focuses on the social institutions and practices constituting each form of society. We step back from this institutional dimension to consider the central normative commitments of socialism. Right. Let's skip down to the socialistic principles, because if there are any strengths in socialism, I think that's where they would have to be. I think that's one of the reasons, again, why I'm willing to talk to a socialist and not a communist. The socialists I've known had principles. communists? I don't think that they do. And I don't think that that's an unfair assessment. I think you can study the history and find it to be demonstrably true. Socialists have deployed ideals and principles of equality, democracy, individual freedom, self-realization, and community or solidarity. Regarding equality, they have proposed strong versions of the principle of equality of opportunity, according to which everyone should have broadly equal access to the necessary material and social means to live flourishing lives. Which I'm going to admit, that sounds wonderful. But some, but by no means all, socialists construe equality of opportunity in a luck/egalitarian way as requiring the neutralization of inequalities of access to advantage that result from people's circumstances rather than their choices. Socialists also embrace the ideal of democracy. I'll let that point go for now, requiring that people have broadly equal access to the necessary means to participate meaningfully in decisions affecting their lives. Many socialists say that democratic participation should be available not only at the level of governmental institutions, but also in various economic arenas. Third, socialists are committed to the importance of individual freedom. Again, I will let that point go. This commitment includes versions of the standard idea of negative liberty and non-domination, requiring security from inappropriate interference by others. It also typically includes a more demanding, positive form of self-determination as the real freedom of being able to develop one's own projects and bring them to fruition. An ideal of self-realization through autonomously chosen activities, featuring people's development and exercise of their creative and productive capacities in cooperation with others, sometimes informs socialist positive views of freedom and equality, as in the view that there should be a requirement of access to the conditions of self-realization at work. Finally and relatedly, socialists often affirm an idea of community or solidarity, according to which people should organize their economic life so that they treat the freedom and well-being of others as intrinsically significant. People should recognize positive duties to support other people, or, as Einstein put it, a sense of responsibility for their fellow men. Or, as Cohen put it, people should care about and, where necessary and possible, care for one another, and, 2, care that they care about one another. Community is sometimes presented as a moral ideal, which is not itself a demand of justice, but can be used to temper problematic results permitted by some demands of justice, such as the inequalities of outcome permitted by a luck/egalitarian principle of equality of opportunity. However, community is sometimes presented within socialist views as a demand of justice itself. Some socialists also take solidarity as partly shaping a desirable form of social freedom in which people are able not only to advance their own good, but also to act with and for others. Given the diversity of fundamental principles to which socialists commonly appeal, it is perhaps unsurprising that few attempts have been made to link these principles under a unified framework. A suggested strategy has been to articulate some aspects of them as requirements flowing from what we might call the ability/needs principles, following Marx's famous dictum in the Critique of the Gotha program that a communist society should be organized so as to realize the goals of producing and distributing from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. This principle, presented with brevity in the absence of such elaboration by Marx, has been interpreted in different ways. One descriptive interpretation simply takes it to be a prediction of how people will feel motivated to act in a socialist society. Another, straightforwardly normative interpretation construes the Marxian dictum as stating duties to contribute to and claims to benefit from the social product, addressing the allocation of both the burdens and benefits of social cooperation. In fulfillment, would, in an egalitarian and solidaristic fashion, empower people to live flourishing lives. The normative principle itself has also been interpreted as an articulation of the broader and more basic idea of human dignity, aiming at a solidaristic empowerment. This idea could be understood as requiring that we support people in the pursuit of a flourishing life by not blocking and by enabling the development and exercise of their valuable capacities, which are the basis of their moral status as agents with dignity. I don't mean to be unfair, but I also don't want to read the entire thing. I think that gives you a fairly decent idea of the strengths of socialism. And I apologize that that's so convoluted. But the ones that were simplistic either were just too glowing and too artificial, or they were just so simplistic as to be laughable, and to me not really worth our time as far as trying to think about it. I guess what I'm going to say is, if that was the way it ran and the way it worked, I would likely be more prone to be a socialist. I don't often see it working the way they're describing it. It seems to me like all too often workers are still coerced to work. But I'm doing your thinking for you here, and that's not right. Sashi says the Indian state of Kerala had an elected communist government at one point, and I'm curious to know how did it do? Let me know if you know how it went. Matt Cheatwood, I dispute the validity of positive rights. Only negative rights can exist without enslaving others, and I absolutely understand that point. I need to do some more thinking about it before I can unequivocally say I agree 100%, but I suspect that I do. So now let's go into, since we've got the positives of capitalism and we've got the positives of socialism, let's go into the negatives of capitalism. Now, I could have done that with the other article, but frankly, I think I would have been being unfair to socialism, because it would have sounded like the only real positive of socialism is just simply capitalism is bad, capitalism is bad, capitalism is bad. And I'm not, again, I am trying to be intellectually honest here. Maybe failing, but trying. For the negatives, ironically, I'm going to the Mises Institute. Now, if you know anything about Mises, you will understand why I'm saying that this is irony, because Mises is all about capitalism. This is this is also where I get my icon from today. This is von Mises right here that you could pretend is talking to you. So you would probably think, what the hell? He criticizes capitalism? Well, he criticizes where our capitalism has gone. And to me, this is where the socialists end up having maybe not good points, but this is where people look to them and say, hey, look, we tried this capitalism stuff and it blew up in our faces. Let's see what you've got. The Mises Wire saying what progressive corporate welfare looks like. There appears to be a mistaken belief on the left that any government action is either done in the interest of the people or in the interest of corporations and rich oligarchs. So the naked corporate welfare to Archer Daniels Midlands is called out, as are the sports stadiums being paid for by taxpayers, and of course the banker bailouts as well, which I am totally against the banker bailouts, neither here nor there. It should be noted that congressional Democrats voted in support of TARP by a rate of 3-1, whereas a slight majority of Republicans opposed it, for what that's worth. In general, however, the left seems to see tax cuts as corporate welfare, while ignoring or outright supporting corporate welfare in many of its guises. The reason is because corporate welfare is rarely sold to the public as a way to help millionaires become billionaires at the taxpayer's expense. It's much more insidious than that. Usually this cronyism comes wrapped in a bill of goods that makes it much easier to swallow. The example they give is Obamacare. Now you're probably asking yourself, wait a minute, that's not capitalism, that's socialism. Well, let's read and see what they say. While the right yells about how the so-called Obamacare is socialized medicine, it would actually best be described as a corporatist scheme. In other words, it's corporate welfare. Indeed, if it were some socialist scheme to destroy private enterprise, one would suspect that these companies' stock prices would plummet before the passing of the bill on March 23 of 2010. This graph shows us what actually happened in the year prior to the bill's passing for the 5 largest health insurance companies. As you see, they pretty much all went up. The chart itself is from finance.yahoo.com. Yahoo was still quite a thing back then. The average return for these 5 companies over the year was 72.85%, almost twice that of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Cigna led the group with a 98.5% increase. Now, it's important to understand how stock prices are valued. They are not derived from the value of the assets a company holds, or even what the company has done recently. Instead, they're valued by how much a company is expected to make in the future, how much those future cash flows are worth today. In other words, investors seem to be uniformly of the opinion that Obamacare was good for business, and they were right. Here are the same company's last 5 years' performance. And like I say, there's only one company here that was only up by, 60-some%. The rest of them profoundly more. It shouldn't be hard to see why an individual mandate billions in subsidies for people to buy insurance for these companies could increase profits. This is especially true given all the rate increases. The law's poor conception has pushed health insurance companies to seek rate increases of 20 to 40% for 2016. Remember that year that Trump won when nobody thought that he would? You ever wonder how that happened or why? I know, I'm getting into politics. The new customers turned out to be sicker than expected. How about pharmaceutical companies? In March of 2009, Billy Talzane, head of Pharma, the main lobbying group of the pharmaceutical industry, was asked whether investors should be worried about the upcoming healthcare reform. His response: think about what this plan does. This plan talks about providing comprehensive health insurance to people who don't have it. That means to patients who can't take our medicines because they can't afford it. $650 billion spent to better insure Americans for the products we make. That ought to be a very optimistic and positive message for everyone who is interested in our sector of the economy. Mike Huckman: if there is some kind of universal health care plan where prescription drugs are more broadly available and they're available at a cheaper price, it's possible your sector may make up in a higher prescription volume and sales what it might lose on price. Billy Talzine: absolutely. Think about this. Almost half of the prescriptions they get written today go unfilled, primarily because people don't have adequate insurance. Early in Obama's presidency, he pushed for cap and trade, a market-driven method to fight global warming. I guess I should make my point. Essentially, the extreme of capitalism often tends to be, oh, well, since it's so good, let's just have the government basically mandate it. Let's have the government force it down our throats and make us buy it, whether we like it or not. And that extreme is where one of the places where it falls apart. 100%, you are correct, Matt Cheatwood. The Walmart Corporation is one of the biggest recipients of the government welfare program. Also, I'm sure you've already thought of this. We subsidize them because they have the greatest number of employees who, and I don't mean to beat them up because I've been one, but they often qualify for government aid because they don't make enough. Whereas, I mean, I hate to put it this way, but if the government wasn't subsidizing them, maybe they would have to pay a living wage or closer to it. It's a thorny problem, and I'm not claiming I have the solution, but where I'm going with this is the extreme of capitalism basically being not regulated by the government, but in bed with the government. Basically, the government is going to not just assist, but force monopolies, force profits. And, if they go broke, they're too big to fail. We're going to give them bailouts. This is where capitalism ends up failing. It's when we decide we're going to actually not practice it. And hello, more kitty, meow, meow. I'm whining about the world and talking about how socialism and capitalism is a big, silly thing. But I tend to be more capitalist than socialist. Sashi, the Kerala situation was a local communist government working in a liberal democracy. Kerala became the least impoverished state while being the second most developed. That's interesting. That's really cool, actually. Kerala in general has been a communal society because of them being a small nation surrounded by larger, more militant nations. So them being under threat shaped the society. Oh, so they can't afford to be. They have to be productive or they're done. And no, you're not wrong. Government mandates are socialism, not capitalism. But essentially, that's where I'm going with this. Is the biggest criticism of it is our societies all too often we decide that we're going to prop up, we're going to essentially not allow the market to make the decision. We're going to have the government make the decision. It's a weird loop. It's like a bad Mobius strip. Once the government gets involved, it can no longer be called capitalism. The biggest flaw in capitalism, if I'm understanding von Mises correctly, and I may not be, but it's socialism. We decide that we're too scared. We're scared too many people are going to die because they don't have insurance. We're scared that people are going to lose their jobs and go hungry. So we prop up the companies. And when they should have failed, they don't. It's getting a little bit late and I wanted to move on, but we'll at least mention the cap and trade thing because I kind of despise cap and trade. So forgive me for not being as intellectually honest as maybe I ought to be. Early in Obama's presidency, he pushed for cap and trade, a market-driven method to fight global warming. More accurately, a corporate welfare-laden plan that wouldn't do much of anything. I can hear my liberal friends howling now. The truth is, if you look at it, all it really does, well, let's read it, see what it does. Paul Krugman accused opponents of the bill of committing treason against the planet. And most of the left seem to agree. But to give credit where credit is due, Dennis Kucinich actually hit the nail on the head. The bill is regressive. Free allocations doled out with the intent of blunting the effects on those of modest means will pale in comparison to the allocations that go to polluters and special interests. The financial benefits of offsets and unlimited banking also tend to accrue to large corporations. And of course, the $1 trillion carbon derivatives market will help Wall Street investors. Much of the benefits designed to assist consumers are passed through coal companies and other large corporations on whom we will rely to pass on the savings. Indeed, Al Gore makes an interesting observation in some of the bonus material to his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. A lot of business leaders are changing their positions. New businesses and CEOs and corporations every week are now joining this new bandwagon saying, we want to be part of the solution and not the problem, which sounds wonderful. Except perhaps they just saw gobs of money available to be made by getting in line with the government. After all, there's the Solyndra scandal, and then General Electric reduced its tax burden to zero. I thought we wanted these big corporations paying their fair share in taxes, but this plan reduced their tax burden to zero, primarily with green energy tax credits. Al Gore has even gotten in on the government dole for green technology and made a fortune himself. And then there was Ken Lay in 1997. Enron's CEO, Ken Lay, wrote an op-ed entitled For Prevention's Sake, Focus on Climate Solutions. In it, he strongly advocated the Kyoto Protocol, which would cap carbon emissions worldwide. On August 4, 1997, Ken Lay met with Bill Clinton, Al Gore, and others at the White House to discuss Kyoto. Ken Lay was an enthusiastic supporter. In 2001, Lay sent an emissary to the Bush administration to lobby for Kyoto. Surprisingly, his old friend turned him down. Of course, the reason Enron wanted cap and trade was the same as Goldman Sachs, to create a new energy market for them to trade in. Anyway, von Mises, it goes on and on and on. And it is, to me, it is true. There are other criticisms of capitalism that socialism makes, but socialism itself, to me, is ironically, the biggest of the criticisms. Instead of letting the market make the decision, we get scared. We decide we don't want the market to make the decision. And we end up playing to the greed of people who just don't really care about us. Matt Cheatwood intensely disputes the reason for the implementation of those mandates. We didn't do that because we were afraid people didn't have insurance. And, honestly, I tend to agree with you. The government did that expressly for the purpose of increasing the profits of insurance companies. Yeah, we just sold it to the people on their fear, but no, I think you're right, actually, about the government anyway. I only know about the Corella stuff because my clan was from there. Interesting. Everyone had to be ready to fight. We learned martial arts at an early age. It didn't matter if you're male or female. That's really interesting. Like sort of how we learn firearms here in the United States. So, Matt Cheatwood, yes. Okay. I'm almost done here. I'm going to go likely illogically all the way from basically the criticisms of capitalism to the criticism of socialism, mine being, and I know I haven't done a great job of establishing this, but my biggest criticism of socialism is that it all too often degrades into communism. And once you get into communism, that's where things kind of go to hell. I realize it is a flaw of this post that I likely need to make a stronger connection in that. So let me know if y'all are interested, and I may try to make that connection at a later date. But this just interested me too much. So if you'll forgive me, I'm skipping straight to something that the right's been talking about a lot and the left has not talked about, as to my knowledge, at all. It isn't news. This is something that came about back in the 80s, but I didn't hear about it until about 5 or 6 years ago. There's an interview online, and it's the flaw in it is the guy is a freaking spook. He's basically an old KGB spy. And like all spies, he hops up and down for about 2 hours of the interview trying to declaim how he is a good guy and he's a good person. And I would suggest that likely he was and is not. But the last 20 or 30 minutes of the interview is the most telling part. And it's the part that the right has been throwing out there, and I think needs to be discussed. And, if we decide to disbelieve it, that's okay. But I think it absolutely needs to be discussed in the framework of the times in which we live. I've got this from bigthink.com. This is a post about Yuri Bezmenov. Hopefully not many of you are too versed in it. Mainly because I want to share something new to y'all. Hello, Lemon Pie. I am declaiming on socialism and capitalism. Welcome to the talk. 39 years ago, at the time this was written, a KGB defector chillingly predicted modern America. He claimed in an interview in 1984, Russia had at the time a long-term goal of ideologically subverting the U.S. He described the process as a great brainwashing that has 4 basic stages. The first stage, he said, is called demoralization, which would take about 20 years to achieve. Now, before I get too deep into this, I don't think that the danger now is so much Russia. I think they did what they did, and instead they fell. But I think that possibly some other elements have taken those old Soviet strategies and have kind of whitewashed them and made them maybe a little softer, and are now applying them to their own ends. Let's see what this blog has to say. And then I'll play a little bit of the interview, and then I'm going to end with my last thing and call it a post. In 1954, early on in the Cold War, the Soviet Union, and as we all know, Trump and Tulsi Gabbard are both Soviet assets. That has been established and proven. I'm being sarcastic for those of you who don't know me very well. The Soviet Union created the Committee for State Security, most commonly known in the West as KGB. The group came to oversee the Soviet Union's internal security, secret police, and domestic and foreign intelligence operations. Across the world, the KGB did whatever it could to thwart pro-Western and anti-Soviet political movements and figures. The group would assassinate political leaders with cyanide. Does that sound familiar? I think there's another group that has done that too. It would fund and arm leftist groups. Again, sounds familiar. Especially those in developing nations. The KGB successfully established moles in U.S. intelligence agencies, though the exact number still isn't and may never be known for sure. Also unclear were the group's long-term plans involving the U.S. A glimpse, however, comes from a former KGB agent named Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, who defected to Canada. Good God, what was he thinking? In 1970, he claimed to know details of a Soviet plan to undermine the U.S., not on the battlefield, but in the psyche of the American public. I know, this all sounds like conspiracy theory. Hear me out, though. Maybe I'm crazy, but just listen to it and see what you think. In 1984, Bezmenov gave an interview to G. Edward Griffin. I thought about talking about him, but for now I'm just going to gloss over who that gentleman is. That may be unfair, but if you wish to do your own research, that is fine. There's more than one viewpoint about G. Edward Griffin. That's all I'm going to say. Much can still be learned from this interview today. His most chilling point was that there's a long-term plan put in play by Russia to defeat America through psychological warfare and demoralization. It's a long game that takes decades to achieve, but it may already be bearing fruit. Bezmenov made the point that the work of the KGB mainly does not involve espionage, despite what our popular culture may tell us. Most of the work was a slow process which we call either ideological subversion, active measures, or psychological warfare. What does that mean? Bezmenov explained that the most striking thing about ideological subversion is that it happens in the open as a legitimate process. You can see it with your own eyes, he said. The American media would be able to see it if it just focused on it. Here's how he further defined ideological subversion. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality. And this is the point. This is the reason why I wanted to bring this up. Change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their countries. Bezmenov described this process as a great brainwashing that has 4 basic stages. The first stage is called demoralization, which takes from 15 to 20 years to achieve. According to the former KGB agent, that is the minimum number of years it takes to re-educate one generation of students that is normally exposed to the ideology of its country. In other words, the time it takes to change what the people are thinking. He used the examples of the hippies, claiming that they were already contaminated by Marxist-Leninist values. Of course, this claim that many baby boomers are somehow espousing KGB-tainted ideas is hard to believe. But Bezmenov's larger point addressed why people who have been gradually demoralized are unable to understand that this has happened to them. Now, I'm going to make a side point here. Remember all the stuff I've been hopping up and down about? That I have friends who are saying things that are just party lines. That it doesn't matter that you show them proof that the opposite or at least something different is true. They're still not going to change their mind. They're still not going to listen. They're going to dismiss everything that you say. Now, I don't know if I'm on the right trail here, but I think it's interesting to note that Bezmenov has to say about demoralization that they are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information. Even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of the behavior. Demoralization, And I'm hoping that this is not true, but at least according to Bezmenov, it's a process that is irreversible. Bezmenov actually thought back in 1984 that the process of demoralizing America was already at the time complete. It would take another generation and another couple of decades to get the people to think differently and return to their patriotic American values. In what is perhaps the most striking passage in the interview, here's how Bezmenov described the state of a demoralized person. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who is demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him a concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he receives a kick in his bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragedy of the situation of demoralization. According to the blogger, it's hard not to see in that the state of many modern Americans. We have become a society of polarized tribes, with some people flat out rejecting facts in favor of narratives and opinions. Once demoralization is completed, the second stage of ideological brainwashing is destabilization. During this 2 to 5 year period, what matters is the targeting of essential structural elements of a nation, the economy, foreign relations, defense systems. The subverter would look to destabilize every one of those areas in the United States, considerably weakening it. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that that Russia is any longer the one that is doing this. But it seems at least conceivable to me that somebody is. Lemon Pie, it isn't a conspiracy theory to say that the USSR put a lot of effort into propaganda. You're not wrong. And we have too, to be fair. Vladimir Putin claims that we have the greatest propaganda machine in the world. I don't know if he's right or not. If he is, then we have to ask ourselves, if something like this is happening, then who is it that is doing it? The blogger says that it's hard not to see in that the state of modern Americans. Once demoralization is completed, then the second stage of ideological brainwashing is destabilization. We take out the economy. Let me make some suggestions here that the blogger wouldn't have necessarily known about back in, that was only a year ago, so maybe he did. But, we've got the people intellectually brainwashed. Let's just say, for fun, just as a thought experiment. We haven't proven it, so let's just do it as an experiment. If he's right that the next stage would be maybe, really porous borders, maybe a bunch of fentanyl coming across the border, maybe we could print a crap ton of money and make sure that the prices just skyrocket. Maybe we could demoralize the military, make them take some things that they don't really want to take, or otherwise they're fired. Make arbitrary standards for promotion that have little or nothing to do with merit or military accomplishment. Just talking out loud here. Maybe I'm wrong. Lemon Pie, it's giving them too much credit. Everyone sometimes gets feelings with over facts because of them. And you may be right. Sashi, in my experience, any political system goes haywire when the politicians no longer fear the people they serve. They become an elite class. I think it's pretty evident I don't think they do fear us. I I don't think they fear us at all. All right. Let's go ahead and finish up with the stages. The third stage, after you've done all that undermining, is crisis. According to Bezmenov, it would take up to 6 weeks to send a country into crisis. Could be a violent change of power, structure, economy. Basically, you throw some kind of a crisis, you get people scared, you get them to obey because they're scared. The final stage is normalization. That's when your country is basically taken over. It's living under a new ideology and a new reality. Just thinking out loud, maybe we've grown normalized with all the crisis. Maybe we've become normalized with, we're constantly under some kind of a threat and we need to obey or else. I know not everyone in the chat, probably almost nobody in the chat has that temperament, but I find a lot of my friends have it. We're going to believe what the government says. We're going to do what the government says. The government is absolutely working in our best interests, and absolutely nothing that you tell them. It doesn't matter how reasonable or how fact-driven. That's the example I'm going to give is the Project 2025. I don't care who you're voting for, but I've found enough videos, and I will share them gladly again if I need to, that the way Project 2025 is being shared to everyone is basically literally 83% lies. And the people that I'm using to evaluate that are all centrists. They're all not pro-Trumpers. They're all people who were, at least at one time, going to vote for Biden. But that doesn't seem to change anybody's mind. Matt Cheatwood, I would have said respect instead of fear. When politicians do not respect the people, that's when they become tyrants. Yeah. Well, I don't know how much of this we want to go through. I'm definitely not going to put you through all of it, but maybe 10 or 15 minutes, maybe, depending on how interested you remain in it. I thought I would share the salient part of his interview. It's largely what I just read, so if y'all feel like you don't need to hear it, that's absolutely understandable too. But here's the interview itself. So,
well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some of
the Hollywood style.
They decided to skip.
From under the nose of the KGB in Bombay airport, I landed the plane and I flew to Greece. It's legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process, which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages.
All right, let's see if anyone has anything to say in the chat. Sashi, that's how Malaysia was destabilized. Blame another group for whatever problems the people have and sit back and capitalize on it. Yep. Lemon Pie made a great observation about interviews with spies. They kind of BS for much of it and let out some nuggets in between. And yeah, and I'm hoping that I've basically skipped all the BS. Now, whether or not these things are nuggets, I know that's probably arguable, but I thought I would share them, see what y'all think. Matt Cheatwood, the strategy sounds familiar. Did they learn it from a man with a funny little mustache? And Sashi says, Matt Cheatwood, it works every time.
The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your.
Let me interpose one thing. One of the things that he did establish in the previous part of the video was that they were often priming members of the media, members of the government. He named names, but I won't name them here. If you want to listen to it, it's right, it's right there. Full interview of Yuri Bezmenov. But he claimed that was the process, was basically not even necessarily bribing these people, but basically forming little clubs with them and little cliques and having little cocktail parties and letting them think that they were the brilliant people and they knew so much about everything, and essentially just covertly sharing a lie, and then somehow that lie becomes a part of the person's worldview. It's a very interesting thing, but I'm oversimplifying it here.
Enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see.
Okay, let me interpose something here. Matt Cheatwood, it's Marxist strategy called the long march through the institutions. Yep, correct. One of the reasons why I'm doing the things that I'm doing, I know some of you have listened to me already know this story, but I was talking to a friend of mine once, and I was thinking about, because, I like to do poetry and stuff. I think that's fun. I know I'm weird. And I was really thinking for July 4 about doing the Patrick Henry speech. Jocko Williams, the Navy SEAL who does a podcast, he's already done it, and he did it so much better than me. But I was sharing with one of my friends that I was thinking about doing the give me liberty or give me death speech of Patrick Henry. And no doubt, Marxist ideology has been in some universities. And I don't want to be such a conspiracy theorist that it's in every university and everybody thinks Marxist and everybody's a communist. But I do think it's more pervasive than I had suspected. So I was sharing this thought with this guy, and this was someone who 20 years ago was like myself. He was a little bit right of center, not massively so, but a little. He thought really highly of the founding fathers. He thought really highly of America. He knew we had flaws, and sometimes he was discouraged about that, as I think most of us are. But by and large, he loved the country. He loved our history. He loved the founding fathers. He agreed with, by and large, with the philosophies that they promulgated. Now it's 20 years later. The reason it's 20 years later is because I got married, and we won't talk too much about that. But 20 years later, I'm talking to him, and I'm sharing with him about my thoughts about this speech, because to this day, to me, that's one of the foundational documents of our country. Basically, the whole point being that we had the revolution not because we were bad and mean and horrible people, but because we legitimately were being oppressed, and we had legitimately tried every form of redress that we reasonably could, and all that was left was to resist with arms. I'm not saying that's where we're at now, but that's where we were at then. And I shared this with him, and he's like, those were really dangerous ideas. And we spent a long time caught under those ideas, and it's taken us a long time to get away from them. I had no idea how to respond to that whatsoever. Basically, I just continued to be his friend and tried my best to ignore the fact that more and more and more of the things that came out of his mouth just sounded like freaking propaganda. It sounded like a bunch of media lies. And every now and then I'd try to gently interpose, well, yeah, but what about this? And totally disregard it. The man I knew 20 years ago was a very loving and respectful man. He was angry now. He's hateful, not to his family or to his friends, but toward the people that he thinks are the wise and intelligent ones. He thinks that the right and the Trump and all these people are despicable human beings who literally deserve to be shot. And I haven't known what to do with this. It scares me. It frightens me. And so I come on here and I talk about all this goofy crap, and hopefully you guys can steer me right if I'm the one that's crazy. But I can't help but think that maybe I'm not, because I'm actually the one that's trying to find the truth. Now, I may not have found it with this video. I may be mistaken about it. Oh, yes, Sashi, thank you for steering me clear. Founding fathers, what about the mothers? Am I a misogynist? You're right. I should have mentioned there's Molly Pitcher. There's help an old man out. Madison, his wife, what was her name? Dolly Madison. Yes, they were the founding mothers. You're absolutely right. Lemon pie, spies, bunch of bitchy little girls. A quote from Bruce Campbell's character on Burn Notice. I need to watch that someday.
Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior.
Anyway, that's the reason why I'm sharing all this stuff. Betsy Ross, thank you. Yes, Matt Cheatwood. Because if he's full of crap, I still would like to know, how is it that his words are almost perfectly describing, possibly not explaining, but describing the experience that I am having with so many people anymore that I thought were reasonable, that I thought were intelligent, that I thought were open-minded and centrist. I'll play a little bit more. Let me know if you're still interested in playing that video, if you want me to just pass on to the last thing. But
in other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid of society.
And again, I'm sincerely hoping, and I do believe, he is a spy after all. He's going to exaggerate. There's wishful thinking in hell as well as in the real world, to quote Screwtape in C.S. Lewis's Screwtape letters.
Of these people. You need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of the United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place and
Yes.
who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept,
Mhm.
these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes, simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people, and the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. They will join the links of dissenters, dissidents.
Yes.
Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninists.
All right. Let me pause on that. There is no place for dissent. Let me check the chat. Sashi, humanity had a good run. Let's welcome our robot overlords. I know I do. I tell you, I'm ready for the robot overlords. Matt Cheatwood, I think it comes down to values. Some of us value liberty more than safety. Some are so fearful they will gladly sacrifice freedom for the illusion of safety. Lemon Pie, it's not an exaggeration that there are people like that. Yeah, agreed. I wanted to pause on this point about we're not going to allow any dissenters. Part of my intellectual journey, and some of you know and some of you don't, I've gone from being a little bit right of center to being probably somewhat left of center, being very upset with the right, being very upset with Donald Trump, feeling like I've been lied to and betrayed. And now all of a sudden, here I am back again on the right, probably going to vote for Trump, very much upset with the left. Now, maybe part of that is just my own schizophrenia, but the biggest part of my persuasion to go back to the right has not been right-wingers. I've just about abandoned listening to the right-wingers. The people I've been listening to have been the dissenters that the Democrat Party is not allowing to speak. We're talking RFK. We're talking Tulsi Gabbard. We're talking Joe Rogan. We're talking Jordan Peterson. We're talking Brett Weinstein. We're talking classical liberals, not communist liberals, but classical liberals who have had dissent to the party apparatchiks. And rather than being the party that listens as they used to be, or we thought they used to be, we were sold that they used to be, instead of listening to RFK and, oh, you have a good point on this one thing, let's work on that one thing. Instead, no, we're going to silence him. We're going to spread a bunch of lies about brain worms and about beheading whales and beheading dogs. And we're going to try to deplatform him. We're going to spread a bunch of lies on the big media things that we own, basically. We're going to try to make sure and fight vigorously for every single state for you not to be on the ballot, because we're the party of democracy. And not only are we going to fight like mad to keep you off the ballot, we're going to completely even ignore our own need for votes. Like if you're in a state where you're taking votes from Kamala instead of Trump, we're still going, or the other way around. I mean, you're taking the votes from Trump instead of Kamala. We're still going to fight like crazy to take you off the ballot. And for effect, I want you to do the thinking on that. Why would you be willing to fight to take someone off of a ballot when they're assisting you? They're taking votes away from your opponent. Why would you still do that? I can think of several reasons, but I want you to do your own thinking on that one. Let's go back to it. And let me know when you lose interest. I'll either play a minute or so until he's about done, or until y'all are like, okay, we've heard enough. This is silly now.
America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg, and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply...
You sure as hell can't get that way by disagreeing with the Pentagon now.
Squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically...
Well, this guy's right, Sashi. You're right. Thinking for yourself will be bad for your health. I think it's ironic the Soviet Union didn't last that much longer, but again, I do not think that it's the Russians that are doing this. I may be the naive one. I may be the one that's wrong. What I think has happened is whatever the powers are, whoever it is that's calling the shots and making the decisions, they've taken those old Soviet strategies and they've probably improved on them and wrapped them up in Western ideals and made them sound all pretty and nice and spiffy for us.
America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of American, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. It's what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems.
Okay, let's think about that. So the economy, foreign relations, and defense systems. All right. Okay.
And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed.
I think he's gloating a little bit here, but maybe I'm wrong.
In this part of the world, that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the...
And let's see, what all are we being promised anymore? I think we're being promised, let's see, we're going to have free education, we're going to have free health care, we're going to have, we're going to fix the border, even though we're not really going to do anything about it, but we're going to fix it. And, and we're gonna stop taxing tips. We got a lot of promises going out there. Now, to be fair, you always do. Matt Cheatwood, defense systems like policy changes that cause enlistment to plummet, 100%. And yeah, he is definitely gloating. Sashi, I'm guessing someone observed what they're doing and ran a scenario on how it could be implemented better. Then later someone found those studies and decided to implement them. Free housing, free food. Harris is promising free houses, free transportation. And again, look, in spite of, this is going to sound so stupid, but I'm really not trying to persuade you not to vote for Kamala. I'm trying to persuade you that we're being freaking brainwashed. And if you're going to vote for her, please feel free to do so, but maybe open your eyes and start doing some research. Hopefully better research than I've done, but basic universal income. Yeah, the very same friend that I talked about, he hops up and down about the basic universal income. He claims, and I think possibly true, that one of the founding fathers said it was a good idea. I don't doubt that maybe there was one, but it's like everything out of his mouth is just Democrat talking points over and over, and trying to demonstrate that, there is another perspective, and there's actually good points in the other perspective, and some of the things on your perspective are proven demonstrably wrong, and one or two things on the other sides are proven pretty nearly demonstrably right. I'm not saying you have to accept all of it. I'm not saying you have to vote for Trump. No, it's all right. Free Willy!
Promises are fulfillable or not. He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins. Never mind. He will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgusting.
We're being told that everything is under control. I know friends who live almost daily with homeless people, people with drug problems surrounding them, occasional riots. I'm lucky. I don't have any of that, but I know too many people who Matt Cheatwood charges for the Willie. Lemon Pie, in 2008, we had a financial crisis because the government tried to force banks to give mortgages to people who can't afford it. Now we have a candidate promising to make the same mistake. Yeah. I think we've got the point from Yuri Bezmenov. If you want to watch more, there's about an hour and 21 minutes. I think you've gotten the best part of it here, though. You know, he gives his 4 points. They sound hauntingly and frighteningly accurate. And I have just one more thing to share in my complete unfairness toward communism itself. Again, I do want to stress, I do think that there's an intellectual difference between socialism and communism. Having said that, I fear that all too often not all the time, but all too often, it does descend into communism. And I think it is demonstrable that communism ends up with some terrible things. What I'm going to share here is a video. I wish the quality of it were higher, but it was the best I could find. When I was a stronger Christian, one of the organizations that I really embraced was something called the Voice of the Martyrs. One of the things that the Voice of the Martyrs did was to spread the word. You know, we talk about Christian persecution in America. We have no idea what we're talking about. You know, I know that there are some not great trends in our government, but I can still go to a church and not be afraid of anyone. I can pray and not be afraid of anyone. People may get upset, but I'm not going to fear for my life because I choose to believe one way or the other, and the other way as well. I think we're still a good enough society. You can be an atheist, I hope, and nobody's going to throw bricks through your window or anything like that. Communism wasn't that way, and certain other ideologies are not that way. If you're not just a Christian, but a Buddhist, if you're if you believe in the founding fathers instead of Karl Marx, you could end up in a really bad place. And the useful idiots that Bezmenov was talking about in the parts of the video I didn't share, they would declaim none of that's going on. There's no gulags. You know, you're absolutely free to go to a church if you want to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Richard Wurmbrand was in a communist prison because of his faith for, I cannot remember the exact amount of time, but it was well over a decade. And he went to Congress, and the congressmen were all spouting the lies. None of that's happening. You made that up. You're a liar. The Russians are good people. And, look, I want to be blunt. I'm not saying that the Russians aren't good people, but the communist government was not. Matt Cheatwood, communism does not mean that everyone owns everything. It means you own nothing. And you will pretend to be happy about it or else. And I'm going to share a little bit about what the or else looks like. Finally, he got tired of listening to the lies, Richard Wurmbrand of Congress.
Jesus had it to do with doubting Thomas. He showed him the marks on his body, and because so many in the free world doubt the cruelty of communism, I have to show the marks not on my body, but on the body of the Church of Christ in communist countries. Look here, look here, look here, look here, look here. It is like this that the communists torture with red-hot iron pokers, with knives, with rubber truncheons. They beat with big clubs. Then afterwards, the ribs are broken. Osteotuberculosis intervenes, infections. I have shown you not my body, not my tortures, but those of the children of God who suffer today in communist countries, hundreds of thousands of them.
Now, again, I'm not trying to share that to tell you to be a Christian or that, you should have any particular ideology or belief. I'm sharing that to let you know. I know it probably sounds like fear-mongering, but this is the direction that these things have tended to go in the past. And to quote Thomas Paine, I know of no other way to evaluate the future than to look at the past. Kamala herself, I don't want to be a fearmonger. Kamala is going to be torturing you. That's not what I'm trying to say. But again, these kinds of movements, they don't stay. In fact, they're frankly not peaceful even now. One side's riots are okay. The other sides are not. I don't know if I've done a good job here. I don't know if I've made a good point or really taught you anything, but all I'm trying to say is there are strengths and weaknesses to both socialism and capitalism. Both of them can be taken to weird extremes that end up being not great for people. Very specifically, in history, we know that socialism can devolve into a communism, and the communism can be a terrible thing that we really don't want to. Sashi, I remember Jordan Peterson speaking on it. You think you can do better because you're benevolent. For my birthday, I'm giving myself the present of the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn. So many people have recommended it, and I know it's going to be a hard read, but I've decided it's time that I read it and learn what we could be in if we're not careful. Matt Cheatwood, I can very easily imagine camps run by those on the left, re-educating the homophobes, the racists, and transphobes. They said it. I mean, it has been said that half of the Republicans are deplorables that need to be in re-education camps. Now, granted, fine. That was hyperbole. But at this point, I'm not sure that I care, because I've seen some of the hyperbole turn into reality. And I've seen some of my friends speaking that hyperbole and laughing, and then looking over here and seeing results. This scares the shit out of me. I know we shouldn't be moving on fear. We should be moving with love and courage and foresight and intelligence. Kamala's already torturing us. Have you ever heard her speak? Oh, gosh, Sashi, I hope my liberal friends never find out where you live. Okay. Sashi's not even American. He's being tortured. Lemon Pie, socialism makes a poor nation. I tend to agree with that. And Matt Cheatwood, it always starts as hyperbole and plausible deniability. Not wrong. So I know I made a few logical leaps, and if people are interested, I will try to connect the dots a little bit better in the future. But this is what I felt like talking about. I hope that some of it was a learning experience. I know I learned a little bit. I'd heard some of the stuff of Bezmenov before, but in preparation for this, I will listen to his video 2 or 3 times. Believe it or not, I don't mean to sound superior, but that's why I skipped so much of it, because so much of it was just, I was such a brilliant spy, and you Americans are big dumbhead nom-noms. And if you want to listen to that, absolutely, please feel free to. But I didn't feel the need to have much of it on here. So, tired blogger analysis. Extremes of capitalism can be bad, but extremes of socialism are just the ruination of anything that you love. I'm going to start the soft, not that music, the soft prone music. Just a couple more people saying things. I will gladly discuss the merits of free market capitalism and the dangers of socialism with anyone. Good on you. Lemon Pie, it's a myth that Scandinavian nations are socialist paradises. They fund their governments with thriving free enterprises. That was what Matt Cheatwood was sharing. Maybe I should Maybe I should do a post on that. But I've got some other things too. I need to look into Holodomoro, Walter Durrani, and some other stuff. But anyway. All right. Let's thank the people in the chat who listened to my weird rant. Thank you very much, JPRPH1, for showing up, for your prayers, for your support. Thank you very much, Matt Cheatwood, for your support, your kindness, helping me through some of the harder times of my life. You're a wonderful human being. Connie Cleary, hail, bird woman of YouTube. I hope that you learned a little bit or were entertained a little bit. And if not, I hope you'll compensate by making a really cool bird video. Bird videos for democracy. A bird in every cage. Sashi, the man from the future, thank you for listening to Americans whine about how we're destroying our own country. Hopefully it is at least entertaining. Unbeknownst to everyone, Sashi is actually the future world dictator. I kind of hope so. I'm trying to kiss up to him, so maybe he'll make me a janitor and give me a minor cabinet post. Mora Kitty, meow meow. Thank you for showing up and listening to my mindless ranting about communism. McCarthy would like to remind you, keep your eye out for communism. I do know that it can go too far the other way, like, seeing a communist under every bush. Thank you, Lemon Pie, for showing up, listening, and being patient with my efforts to figure out what the hell's going on in the world. I think I got everybody. Not a bad turnout for this late in the night. I thought since it's vacation, I truly would, for a change, be the mad blogger. What blogs at midnight? Well, I love everybody here. Thank you, everyone. Gonna try to remember my spiel. It's been said that anyone that tells you that life is anything other than pain is trying to sell you something. And it is true. I am trying to sell you something. I'm trying to sell you on the idea that liberty is better than tyranny. Freedom is better than slavery. That you are, in fact, smart enough and wise enough to live your life, to make your own decisions, to be free. That while, yes, you absolutely should submit to legitimate government of your own choosing that has demonstrated that it has your best interests at heart, you should not submit to tyrants or to bullies. And lastly of all, I would like to let you know that you are not going crazy. You are going sane in a world gone mad. Thank you very much for listening. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The Holodomor. All right. Sell me the idea that freedom is more important than the illusion of safety. Agreed. I'm not the most courageous person in the world. I don't know if I've got the courage that Wormbrand had to actually endure actual torture, but I do agree. If you think you can buy that safety with your freedom, it's a lie. It's a lie. Thank you all very much. Hope you have a wonderful evening. I will be streaming next time on Thursday on Netter's Network. And there it is. No, Richard Wormbrand had no choice in the matter. Actually, he did. He did have a choice. He had a choice. He could have turned his back on what he believed in. And maybe what he believed in was wrong, but I think we'll all admire he didn't turn his back on it. Like you say, Matt Cheatwood, he survived the torture. I hope we don't have to, but if we do have to, I hope we have that courage. Take care. You are loved.